live and get started. So thank you everybody for your patience. We'll get started right away as folks trickle in from another meeting. Thank you again for joining us for the April 2022 AB 617 Portside Community Steering Committee meeting. To get us started, I will hand it off to one of our great interpreters, Gloria, who will give us instructions on how to access interpretation.
You want me to give the instructions in English or in Spanish?
If you can give them in both English and Spanish, that'd be great.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Gloria. I am one of your interpreters. If you would like to listen to this webinar in English, please choose the language, the English language. You can find the little globe at the bottom of the screen. You can click on it and then you will see the language, either Spanish or English. Please, if you only speak English, click on the globe and click the Spanish option. Oh, there it is. You can see it on the screen. And you can also mute original audio if you would like to speak, if you would like to hear the webinar only in one language and not to have interference with the other language. Now, I am going to repeat the instructions in Spanish. Muy buenas tardes, soy Gloria, una de sus intérpretes. Por favor, escoja su idioma favorita en la parte de abajo de la pantalla. Hay un globito donde dice interpretación. Por favor, escoja, haga un clic y le puede escoger el idioma. Va a haber español e inglés. Si solamente habla español, por favor, escoja el español y apague el audio original para escuchar solamente ese idioma. Si tiene algún problema, por favor, puede subir la mano virtual o lo puede escribir en el chat para poder ayudarla. Muchas gracias.
Gloria.
Yes.
Soy Vicky, pero yo no tengo, ahorita únicamente veo a usted como intérprete y no tengo el globo, entonces tengo que, no sé qué hacer. Voy a hablar con Chuy. Quizás puedes empezar. Chuy, I'm just telling her that I don't, oh, there we go. Yay.
Yes, Anna will just have to add you on, so we're good. Gracias. Just for confirmation, are folks able to listen to the Spanish right now? ¿Pueden escuchar la interpretación en español?
Sí, escuchamos.
Gracias, Montserrat. And I see that Josephine and Alicia have their hands raised. Josephine, is everything okay?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, no problem. Y Alicia, ¿puedes acceder la interpretación?
Sí, era nada más para decir que ya estamos escuchando.
Muchas gracias. Perfecto. Next slide, please. Thank you again, everybody. This is the, once again, the April 2022 Portside Community Steering Committee meeting. Thank you again for joining us a little later than we usually do, but glad to see great participation amongst everybody. Next slide, please. Now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Anna, who will go over the meeting objectives and the agenda.
Good evening, everyone. For today's meeting objectives, they are to learn about Portside air quality trends through the San Diego County Air Pollution Control District's preliminary air quality monitoring data. Also to learn about and provide input on the Port of San Diego's draft zero emission truck transition plan, and to receive an update on AB 617 incentive funding. For today's agenda, after we go through roll call and go through any general updates for today and the approval of the meeting notes, there will be a presentation on the preliminary Portside air monitoring data, followed by a presentation on the draft zero emission truck transition plan. And then we'll give an update on the AB 617 incentive funding. Then we will close off the meeting with any public comments as well as any closing remarks and updates. Just as a reminder, with the meeting agreements, the first one is to create space for everyone to contribute, to step back if you have had a chance to contribute, step up if you are more on the quiet side. Only one person to speak at a time, to listen to each other, to respect each other opinions, knowledge, and perspective, also be conscious of time, and to speak slowly and clearly for the interpreter. And now I'll pass it back to Chewy.
Thank you, Anna. Now we'll go through our steering committee membership roll call. So next slide, please. And to get us started, is Keith Corey here from the city of San Diego?
Yes, present. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Keith.
Hi.
Jack Monger from IEA.
Good evening, I'm here.
Hey, Jack. Massey Hatch. Is Massey here? Not seeing Massey. Sarah Giovi.
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Sarah. Is Lydia here as well? Not seeing Lydia.
I don't think she was going to make it.
Got it. Sandy Naranjo.
Here.
Thank you, Sandy. Larry Hoffreiter.
Here.
Hi, Larry.
Hi.
Phil Trom from Sandag.
Here.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Chewy.
Is Carrie with us as well?
I don't believe she is.
Got it. Thank you. Joy Williams, EHC.
Good evening, I'm here.
Hi, Joy. Martin Reeder, National City.
I'm here too. Good evening.
Hi, Martin. And is David also here? David Welch?
David Welch is not here.
Got it. Thank you. Roman Partida Lopez from Greenlining.
Hey, good evening. I'm here.
Hi, Roman. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Yoon is joining us from work, and she did sign on earlier, so we'll have her as present. And I'm not seeing Dr. Diaz. Moving along, Diane from Caltrans, are you here?
Sorry, this is Dr. Yoon, I'm here.
No problem, I got you.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not seeing Diane. And Kim will be joining us on behalf of US Navy. Are you here, Kim? Not seeing Kim. Is Helen here? Not seeing Helen. Is Dinah Willier here?
I'm here.
Hey, Dinah. And Filomena Marino.
Good evening, I'm here.
Filomena. Is Janice Luna Reynoso with us today? Not seeing Janice. Is John Alvarado here? Not seeing John. Hillary Medina. Not seeing Hillary. Alicia Sanchez.
Presente.
Alicia. Margarita Moreno.
Presente.
La Margarita. Naomi Sanchez. Not seeing Naomi. Vanessa Contreras. Not seeing Vanessa. Salvador. Sal, thanks for joining us. Montserrat Hernandez.
Presente.
La Montserrat. Sylvia Calzada.
Good evening, everyone.
Sylvia. Ashley Valentin.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Ashley. Thanks for joining us. Josephine Talamantes.
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Josephine. And Maritza Contreras. That's Maritza Contreras. Thank you, everybody. Then I'll wanted to hand it over to Domingo to give any general announcements on behalf of the Air District.
Thank you, Chuy. I don't have any announcements at the moment, but I know there's some information that Commissioner Naranjo wanted to share from the port, so I will hand it over to her.
Thank you, Domingo. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Port Commissioner Sandy Naranjo. I just want to share with you all that on Thursday, May 5th, which is next Thursday, 6 p.m., the Port of San Diego is hosting our workshop in person on Pepper Park. This will be at the Longshoreman Hall right there on Bay Marina Drive. And so most of you have participated in the workshop. They've been virtual. We've been getting your input. So what we've been doing is gathering all the input from the workshops. We've had surveys and we're putting it all together and to show you a rendering that incorporates everyone's input. And so we want to have a discussion with you all. It's going to be exciting. We're going to have great speakers. And so we hope that you can be there. We're also going to have food. We're also going to have childcare, and we're also going to provide interpretation. So we'll have interpreters, Spanish interpreter, and also interpreter for Tagalog for our Filipino community members. So this is a super inclusive workshop. We encourage you to attend. It's going to be really fun. I'm going to be there. We'll all have fun. And I'm going to put in the chat the link so you can sign up and get all the details. And again, it's next Thursday, May 5th, 6 p.m. at the Longshoreman Hall, which is 1000 Bay Marina Drive, Suite 109 here in National City. And I'll pass it back to you, Domingo.
Thank you, Commissioner. And actually, I was just kidding. I do have two important announcements, actually. One is our board, the Air Pollution Control District Governing Board adopted the public participation plan for APCD, which is a very important accomplishment. We are very proud of this plan. It was developed in close collaboration with a number of you here from the steering committee and a number of community-based organizations throughout the county. It will help us expand our outreach and increase our presence in different communities throughout the region. And we certainly look forward to implementing the plan. So thank you to everybody that contributed to that plan. And it's an important milestone that was also part of our SERP. So congratulations in that sense to everybody here. Another important accomplishment was the adoption of our framework for our Office of Environmental Justice for APCD. With this office, what we're hoping to do is to have an intentional process to integrate environmental justice considerations into everything that we do in APCD. And that's also something that was called out in the SERP for Portside. So another big accomplishment and an important milestone. So just wanted to share that update with everybody. And again, thank everybody for their collaboration in developing these two important plans. So back to you, Chuy. Chuy, I'm not mute. Yes.
Thank you for that. I just shared that. I'll make sure to share Commissioner Naranjo's announcement to our listserv after the meeting. And moving along, I wanted to open it up to the steering committee members for a motion to approve last month's meeting notes as well as tonight's agenda.
Martin Reeder, National City, so moved.
Second, Commissioner Naranjo, second.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone opposed or have any edits? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, so the notes and today's agenda is approved. Thank you, everybody. Moving along, I wanted to hand it over to Dr. David Soderman, who will give us another update, including air monitoring data that the air district has been collecting in the Portside community. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Chewy. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Sodeman, and I'm the Chief of the Monitoring and Technical Services Division at APCD. Today, I'll give an update on the air monitoring data. Next slide, please. Here's the outline for tonight's presentation. We'll talk brief about the community concern and the sampling equipment that will address the community's pollutants concerns. Next, we'll present the site locations and their monitoring purpose. Then a discussion on the data and what we have seen over the last 2 years. Next slide, please. So what are the concerns of the residents in the community? The district met with this steering committee a number of years ago, and through these meetings, we collectively identified 3 main concerns. And those are the toxic volatile organic compounds, and these can come from the operations of the port businesses as well as vehicle traffic. Another concern was from metals, potentially from welding and plating activities, as well as metal scrap facilities. And the third pollutant of concern was the diesel particulate matter, and this comes from diesel engines that operate in the Portside area, as well as from diesel vehicles that drive in and around the communities. Next slide, please. So following the identification of the pollutants of concern, we then had to decide on what sampling equipment to use. And through the steering committee, we decided on a mixture of traditional sampling methods and newer technology was needed. This technology included the SUMA canisters, which is the top left picture, which are used to collect whole air samples and then sent to a lab for analysis for the volatile organic compounds. Particulate matter will be collected on a filter using the equipment in the top right, and then will be sent to a lab for the metal analysis. And currently there is no direct measurement of diesel particulate matter. However, a large fraction of diesel particulate matter is called black or elemental carbon, and black or elemental carbon can be measured. And the instrument pictured on the bottom can measure black carbon in near real time. And what that means is that data will get a data point every hour. Next slide, please. So what are the health effects from diesel particulate matter? Diesel particulate matter is a complex mixture. It contains over 40 different toxic air contaminants, which also includes black carbon. Long-term exposure to elevated levels of diesel PM can increase the risk for cancer, and short-term exposure to diesel PM can irritate the eyes, the nose, the throat, and the lungs. It can cause headaches, coughs, and nausea, and it increases the sensitivity to allergens. The California's Office of Environmental Health has set a chronic reference exposure limit for diesel particulate matter at 5 micrograms per cubic meter. At this time, there is no short-term standard for diesel PM. And more information regarding the health effects from diesel exhaust can be found on the website listed on the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. And we'll make sure that this gets out to everybody. As part of CARB's work in the community, they are doing some air toxic risk modeling. And the preliminary results that they presented at last year, one of last year's steering committee meetings, indicated that about 84% of the cancer risk in the Portside community is from diesel particulate matter. This map shown here is the estimated concentrations of diesel particulate matter through the various locations in the community. CARB's work here illustrates the importance of measuring and tracking diesel particulate matter. The significant component of the Portside's community emissions reduction plan focuses on reducing diesel particulate matter. Thus, that it's important for APCD to measure and track diesel particulate matter in the community. As mentioned earlier, there is no direct measurement of diesel PM, but instead APCD will measure black carbon. So the question is, what's the relationship between black carbon and diesel particulate matter? Next slide, please. To understand that relationship, we must first understand what black carbon is. Black carbon is formed by the incomplete combustion from a variety of solid and liquid fuels. Basically, if it burns, it can create black carbon. The picture here on this slide is actually a picture of black carbon with utilizing a very high powerful microscope. You can see that the particle that is made up of many, many small spherical shaped balls that are stuck together to form a larger particle. A major component of diesel particulate matter is black carbon, and studies characterizing the particulate matter emitted from diesel engines, it's estimated that about 70% of that mass is black carbon. And we can use this 70% value to estimate the diesel PM values from the measured black carbon data. And that's if we assume that all the black carbon measured in the community is from diesel PM and none from any other sources. Next slide, please. This map is one that we should all be familiar with. It's the sampling locations that APCD has in operation and are currently trying to work through the permitting process to get operating. The sites listed in green are operational, and the sites listed in yellow are in process of getting permits to install power, security, and our equipment. Each of these sites have a different monitoring objective. For instance, the site labeled NCD that once operational, excuse me, is located within 100 feet of an active rail line and is along a major truck route. And so that site will be very important to measure concentrations from the warehouses that have the trucks coming in and out, as well as the train lines. The site labeled LCC is located near a park, and so this is a site that will be good at measuring concentrations that could affect the residents while they're at the park. SES is located on the elementary school grounds, but it's also sited away from major pollution sources, individual pollution sources. So it also supports our regional monitoring activities. And one thing that we know is that young people and the elderly are more susceptible to air pollution than kind of the young adults and middle-aged adults. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at the data, and I know this is there's a lot of information on this slide. This is basically the equivalent of 2 years of data. It starts from July of 2019 and the top left, and ends at June of 2020 and the bottom right. And the blue and white kind of bars there are just to help differentiate the different time periods of the year. And so this slide displays each data point on this slide is the daily average of black carbon measured at each of the different sites, which are shown in different colors. Again, from July of 2019 through June of 2021. And so the top series of data is from July of 2019 to June of 2020, and the bottom traces is from July of 2020 to June of 2021. And one thing that kind of, when you look at this, that jumps out is that the second and third quarter of 2020, which is April through September, is much lower than the first and the fourth quarter of that same year. And this time period was also during the COVID stay-at-home orders. But one thing we also notice is that the the second quarter, which is the April through June time period of 2021, is also low compared to the January through March timeframe of 2021, when the stay-at-home orders weren't really in effect anymore. And this is one thing when we look at the data here, is that it's complicated because of weather. For particulate matter, weather has a major influence on the measured concentration. If it rains, the particulate matter gets washed out and we get very, very low levels of particulate matter. During the warmer months, the atmospheric missing height, or sometimes referred to as the inversion layer, is higher, which this allows the pollutants to disperse more over a larger area, vertical area, and this lowers the measured concentration at the ground level. So in general, when we look at particulate matter, what we typically see during a course of a calendar year is that we see lower concentrations during the warmer months than the colder months. And so from looking at the data on this type of plot, makes it hard to say how much the stay-at-home orders really lowered the black carbon concentrations. And because of the weather, we usually like to collect data and compare it from the same season from multiple years. And so if we look at just the, like, say, fourth quarter, the October through December timeframe, which is kind of the first white series of bars, from 2019, which is up on the top, to 2020, we can see that the 2020 time period in October to December has a higher average than the 2019 time period. And this kind of makes sense in the sense that during that time period of the year, the stay-at-home orders was kind of being lifted. A lot of businesses were kind of re-ramping back up and kind of re-gearing back up. And so there was a lot of deliveries, a lot of truck traffic compared to the previous months or the previous year when there wasn't that much because of COVID and then everybody trying to kind of, I think, get business back to normal and try to make up for lost time. Another thing that we can look at is that this data is collected every hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so we can look at data in a different way other than just a time series. And so if we go to the next slide, we can now look at that. Now, this slide is kind of complex, and so we'll kind of slow it down a little bit and kind of look at it. So this is the black carbon data that's only collected on Saturday. And what we're looking at is we're going to take for each quarter for 3 months, we're going to take all the individual hours. So we're going to take all the midnight to 1 a.m. hour during January through March, and we're going to average that together, and that's going to be one data point. And we're going to do that for every hour during the day. In this case, just on Saturday. So we're only looking at Saturday data, and each data point is representative of a single hour. And so this is called a time of day plot. And when you look at just one of these, you can now look at how does the pollution concentration change as a factor of day. And so it's nice to look at, you know, when we see pollutants that are emitted from vehicles, we typically see an increase during the morning and evening rush hour traffic. So we'll see an increase in the morning rush hour traffic, and then it will kind of decrease during the midday, and then it will increase again at the evening hour traffic. And that's very common for pollutants that are emitted from vehicles. Pollutants that are created through chemical reactions during the daytime, like ozone, what we'll see is we'll see low concentrations in the early morning. We won't see an increase in concentration. We'll see a continual increase in concentration as the day goes on, as those pollutants are emitted and then form through the daylight hours. And then we'll see a decrease in those concentrations at night. So with black carbon is formed from the combustion of fuels. And so we expect to see more of it where we see a bump in concentration during the morning and evening rush hour traffic. And we do see that one of the best examples to see that is the bottom October to December of 2020. And you can see kind of the concentration decreases during starting from midnight, but then around 6 in the morning till about 10, there's a bump. And then again, it kind of decreases during the rest of the day. And then starting about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you see an increase in the concentration through midnight. So it's interesting that it increases through late at night and into the early morning hours. And so why is that? And we know that black carbon comes from heavy duty truck driving. And what do we know about their driving patterns? We know that a lot of trucks like to drive at night on the freeways because there's less personal vehicles on the road, making it easier for them to navigate the roads. And so in the last slide, we kind of talked about the stay-at-home orders. And so if we look at kind of the far right slides there, the two, the top and the bottom, the top one is from March to April of 2020, and the bottom one is March to April, or sorry, April to June of 2020, and then the bottom one is April to June of 2021. And one thing you'll notice is that the concentration for that time period is very flat in 2020 throughout the day. And so you don't really see, you see a little bit of bump in the morning rush hour traffic, but not much one in the evening. You don't really see an increase in the traffic at night. And so that's a really good indication that there's a lot of people not driving as much, especially when you start comparing it to 2020, especially the green site there, which is you can definitely see more of what we see in the rest of the years, where we see a higher concentrations at night. You see the bump in traffic, the bump from the morning traffic. So we definitely saw that in the first few months of the stay-at-home orders, a decrease in vehicle related emissions. So if we go on to the next slide, we kind of go into what are the next steps. We're going to continue with data analysis. We're going to continue to look at the black carbon data. We still have more months of data to look at and to digest and interpret. We're starting to get back the lab-based elemental carbon, which is it's a little bit better indicator for diesel PM. It's a little bit more accurate than the black carbon one. So we can investigate that to see if we continue to see the same type of patterns that we're seeing with the black carbon data. And we need to finalize a couple contracts. We're in the final stages of those, working with the county's purchasing and contracting department to finalize those contracts. And then obviously we need to continue to get the rest of the sites up and running and get more instruments out there so we can look at more spatial differences between the different sites. And again, I mentioned earlier that different sites have different objectives and different influences from nearby. And so we want to get those sites up and running to see, you know, like NCD being near a couple major warehouses. Do we see really high concentrations there, or is it going to be typical of what we see in our existing ones? So with that, that concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you for that, David. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and I'll call your name to ask your question. So to get us started, Jack.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks, David, for that presentation. So we can see how the graphs help us see how the COVID experience has affected black carbon. I guess what would be sort of maybe the next logical step would be to understand as you look at those graphs, to understand at what point is there an impact on public health and to what extent? In other words, is there a point in there at which alarms should be going off because they represent really a serious exposure to black carbon which means diesel particulate matter,
Right.
and so forth?
Yeah. So if we go based off of the California WIHA 5 micrograms per meter cubic meter, that is a chronic level, reference emissions, reference exposure limit. And so they term chronic as an average over the course of a year. And that's 5. So if we go back up one slide, you'll see that it's kind of hard to probably see the numbers, but the very top of the graph is 5 micrograms per cubic meter. But that is of diesel particulate matter, and what we're measuring is black carbon. And so it's not a direct apples to apples comparison. You can't look at this value and say, hey, look, the maximum that we see here is about 3 micrograms per cubic meter of diesel or of black carbon, and say that we're less than the 5, because diesel PM includes more than just black carbon. But if we assume this is all from diesel, and we assume that 70% of diesel particulate matter is black carbon, then you can take these numbers and multiply by 1.3 and then say, okay, how do we now compare? And if we do that, you'll see that if you take 3 and multiply it by 1.3, it's not above 5. But my concern is WIHA also gave you a risk factor associated with diesel PM. And if you take that risk factor number, which I don't remember what it is, and multiply it by 5 micrograms per cubic meter, that number is very, very high in terms of a cancer risk. It's, I think, over 1,000 per million. And so is 5 micrograms per cubic meter the right number we should be looking at? Or should we be taking these data and then try to convert it into a risk factor and look at it more that way?
And if I may interject, part of the information that we'll receive at our meeting in May is going to be looking at this from the standpoint of cancer risk. We're going to be looking at the model that CARB has been working on in collaboration with us and with the port. So we'll have a little bit more data for cancer risk based on that model. I just wanted to offer that point. And that's next month.
Thanks, Domingo, and David. I think that'll be helpful because at the end of the day, it's nice to know what the relationship has been between COVID and these highs and lows. But what I think many of us were hoping from the sampling equipment and all the measurements in those stations was to truly understand exactly when or what the risk was and where it was coming from. So I hope when that we're looking to you, I think, to the district to come back and tell us, whether 5 is a good measure for the community to be using, or is it cancer risk, or is this some combination there, just to understand exactly what all of this means here. So.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely look into that and try to kind of get more useful information to the public related to these numbers, as opposed to highs and lows and the traditional way that we look at data.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving along, I know Josephine, you had your hand raised, but it might have been lowered. Do you still have a question or comment? I'm not seeing Josephine on the call anymore. So moving along, Larry.
Yeah, hi. I just want to make a brief comment. I just really want to thank you, David, and your team for analyzing this data and providing this information. As Domingo said, I know CARB is going to be, bringing forth some additional information, I think next month, regarding, health risk and cancer risk. But I think, I think we need all the tools in the toolbox. And I think it's one thing to estimate emissions based upon activity and various assumptions, but I think what's so powerful about the monitoring data that you guys are displaying here is that it's actual real life samples of air quality that you guys have collected and analyzed. So I just want to, again, thank you for again, delving in, putting together this information and then helping to, synthesize it and explain it to us. I really good job and very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Sarah?
Hi, David. Thanks for the presentation. Agree, it's been very informative. I don't want to put you on the spot for explaining the CARB slide, but there was a slide a few back that had like a map showing the concentration of diesel in there that seemed to come from CARB. Is that measured or was that estimated? Do you know?
That's modeled. So that's from the emissions inventory they then did like a dispersion model to it. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no
Sarah, and this is Domingo again. Sorry for the multiple interjections, and that's part of what we'll be receiving next month. So that model is what CARB will go over with us, and the most updated information.
Yeah, it wasn't actually the picture that you're showing, but it's the one with the thin strip through the bay. Like, it's really always very interesting to me. Like, how do you know what's happening in this thin little strip out in the bay, right? So I'd like to understand how kind of they derive those boundaries and but perhaps that's for the next meeting. So yeah, thanks a lot.
The boundaries for that, Sarah, that's based on the census tract, and that one kind of long one that then kind of looks like a golf club, that's just a census tract, and so I'm not too sure if they model it within that census tract or if it's just but that's a census tract.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I'll move over to members of the public and come back to Joy. Marcia Beverman, and you should be allowed to unmute now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just was wondering, you mentioned that you're using black carbon as a surrogate for diesel, and your assumption is that all of the black carbon is diesel particulate. Could you tell us what other sources of black carbon there are, and how you know whether it is a good surrogate for diesel if the other sources aren't being removed?
Right. So gasoline vehicles will produce black carbon as well, but it's at a much lower concentration than diesel. It's the percentage of particulate matter from a gasoline vehicle that is black carbon is I think it's 10 to maybe 10 to 30% on average. But the amount of particulate from a gasoline vehicle is also much lower. If you look at gram per particulate per, fuel consumed, it's much lower than a diesel. The other sources of black carbon that you can get is barbecues, wood burning. You can even get some in your house with candles, especially when you extinguish the candle and you get that smoke, you can get black carbon in that as well. Cigarette smoke is also can produce black carbon.
And so wood burning, that would include wildfires?
Correct. That would include wildfires, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Great. Then moving along, Akshita, you should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, I also realized my question was just answered. However, I did want to thank both David and Domingo for between last meeting and now for fielding questions that I had. They've been really receptive, and I wanted to thank them for that. I just also wanted to follow up on how else are we thinking about expediting the monitoring at other sites. I know there's a lot of, we've gone over just how long drawn that process is, but because we have a set of committed people over here, I was wondering if perhaps in the near future we could brainstorm what are the other ways we could expedite little portions of that, given that, you know, I mean, we need to get power, we need to get a host to host these monitors, and yeah, if we could like brainstorm other ways to think about who should be called upon to host those monitors, I think that would be helpful just to get, again, we see how useful this kind of data is, but I think having you know, data from a wider range of sources and a wider range of sources and spatially kind of dispersed data is going to be really important. So we're not kind of spatially skewing what we're seeing. So if what is impeding that process is the kind of installation and running and, you know, the getting of the contracts and all that kind of bureaucratic process, is there some way we could brainstorm like expediting some portions of it? I know I mentioned this last time, but what if we were to have like corporate social responsibility incentives to host a monitor, right? Like a lot of corporations are constantly looking for some way to participate in that, but instead of doing something that is just a namesake, here we have a very tangible and material requirement. So it would be great to see some sort of land sharing or, you know, contract. But I'm just throwing that out there as like a broader realm of possibilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And just highlighting that Roman also agreed with that comment. Moving along, Josephine, I see that you were able to join back, so I'll hand it over to you, and then Joy and Jack afterwards.
Well, my question, and I don't know how to determine what is black carbon, what is diesel, particulate matters. I mean, I learn a lot by watching this process, but every time I cross over, well, not every time, and that's the problem. Every time, a lot of times when I cross over on Harbor Drive, the bridge that goes over the port where the trains are, there is a distinct odor that it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, if it comes into my vehicle, it goes straight to my head and gives me a headache. I've defined it as methane, but I don't know that that's for fact. And I have talked to Larry Hochmeyer about it in the past, and I don't know how to isolate it to include it in an assessment of what we're trying to solve. And I worry about it because it would be, you know, it's right close to where if the air is pushing forward, it would probably go straight over to the elementary school in that area. So I know I'm not being very specific, but I just don't know how to define it or where it's at, but I know it happens periodically. And recently I had some visitors come in from another state, and they were driving to the airport, and then they contacted me because that the odor had hit them before they got to the airport when they were leaving town. And I didn't know how to answer it. So I don't know if it fits into any of this, but I know it's a problem and I don't know how to detect it. And I need help.
Okay. I mean, when that happens, definitely contact our compliance department and file an odor complaint, and they can come out and do an investigation on that. And so
you know, I've done that, and by the time they get there, that odor is not consistent. And but I know that it does affect. It affected me when I was going over, and it affected people that have visited me going on their way to the airport. It's inconsistent, and by the time the complaint comes through and people get there, there's no order. So I don't know what to do there. but I just need to say it here and report it. I've done it before, but no one seems to have the answer, but I'm sure somebody has the answer, and I'm not able to tap into who that is.
This is Domingo again. Thank you, Josephine, for that comment. And we can check with our compliance division to see if they have gotten other complaints and if we have any data related to what you're sharing with us tonight, and then get back to this group to see if there's something that we might have gotten already through other channels. But with odors, it's a little bit difficult because, like you said, sometimes it's fleeting, right? So by the time that we have someone there, the odor is no longer there. But I encourage you or anybody who experiences this to continue contacting us and see if we're able to catch it, I guess. But in the meantime, I'll touch base with our compliance division and see if we have any data on this already.
Great, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Moving along, Joy?
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. That was really interesting and informative. I was wondering what sites are capturing metals data and when would we start seeing some of that data?
Yeah, so right now, none of our sites are capturing metals because we don't have the contract in place.
Oh.
But once we get the metals contract in place, all the sites that can incorporate the sampler will have it, which is currently now will be all the sites are planned to have metals, with the exception of Ocean View Boulevard, which our footprint is there is just too small to support a second instrument there. But all the other sites will have a metals sampler there once that contract is in place.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Moving along, Jack.
Thank you. David, could you go back to that slide that had the monitoring station locations? You made a comment there that I missed. Yeah. So you mentioned one of these sampling stations, whether maybe it was the NCD one, has been located so that it could monitor traffic going to warehouses or something. Was that the right?
Yeah, that's correct. The NCD one is off of, I believe it's I forget what the main road that it's on. But there's I think two major warehouses just east of that site that it's most logical that the trucks entering and exiting those warehouses would travel right along that main road that NCD is located.
And David, that's I believe that's 24th Street, and that's right by the National City Depot, the train,
Yes.
the museum.
Yes, yeah, it's actually on the train depot museum
Correct.
property.
Okay, so if you're looking for diesel particulate matter right next to the freeway like that, how do you distinguish between trucks that would be headed to the warehouse and trucks that would just be coming north from across the border or headed south?
I mean, it's a little bit off the freeway. I mean, it's on this scale on the map, it looks like it's right on the freeway, but it's not on the freeway. And it really is going to be wind dependent. And so if the wind is coming from the west, then you won't really get, that much traffic from the freeway. Now, if you could get traffic from those trucks that are coming and maybe, using that to get on Harbor Drive. But it's more not necessarily, I guess you're right. I shouldn't say it's from the warehouses specifically, but it's definitely going to be influenced by trucks coming and going from the warehouses, but not exclusively from the warehouses.
Is it your hope that monitoring station will be able to distinguish that, or?
No, it's just going to be if you live near warehouses or near along a major truck route, these might be representative. The concentration measured at that site would be representative of that.
Which obviously you still have to take into consideration, like you said, that what direction the wind's blowing, how much traffic is going up north and south on I-5, and then like I said, how close you are. Okay, I just want to understand what the expectations were.
Right. No,
Thank you.
we're not going to try to say, hey, this site is measuring X amount and it's due to the warehouses. That's not an objective.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. And before I move on to Akshita, I do want to highlight Roman's question in the chat. And I know we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting, but maybe David, you can give a quick summary of the challenge.
Yeah. So the challenge is to get monitorings up and running is that there's a lot of other agencies that are involved. And there's, our priority is not their priority. And so when we submit a bid to get something done, it goes in their queue and we don't go to the top of their list. And so we need to work our way through that system. Getting these contracts up and running is not something that is very quick or easy to do. And so there's a lot of back and forth communications between us and either the sites or in this case with the lab contracts, a lot of going back and forth with them. There's proposals that scope of works that have to be written, they have to be then placed out to bid. That has to be open for a period of time. They have to bid on it. We have to evaluate the responses. We might have to go back and ask for clarifications, and it just adds time. And with staff hours, we're not able to devote 100% of all our staff time just on establishing sites. There's other work that we need to get done in terms of maintaining equipment, doing data analysis, other things. And so unfortunately that's kind of the big delay that it's going, is that a lot of times we submit what we need to submit and then we need other agencies to respond, and there's delays in those times because they have other priorities as well.
Thank you, David. Akshita, do you still have a question?
Oh, no, that was from earlier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. And Jack, I see your hand is still raised.
Sorry, Chief, I forgot to lower it. There you
no
go.
problem. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I think we're ready to move on to the next item. So I wanted to pass it over to the Port of San Diego team, who's going to give a presentation on the zero emission truck transition plan.
Okay, well, great. Thanks, Chewy, and thanks to the steering committee for having me tonight. I'm Phil Gibbons. I'm a program director in our planning department at the Port. I'll let you know, I'm also joined by a variety of colleagues. Of course, Larry Hoffreiter. He's on the planning team alongside me. And then we brought in our consultant group tonight too, who is spearheading this heavy duty zero emission truck transition plan. And if there are any technical questions, they may be able to answer it. So I just want to introduce Lance McNiven, Pete Rusidi, and Tamara Mahidi are also on the line tonight. So our goal tonight is to provide the steering committee with an update on the heavy duty zero emission truck transition plan that we're currently working on. Happy to answer all your questions about where we're at and what's going on and any of the analysis that we've done to date. But more importantly, I'm hoping that we can engage in a dialogue tonight regarding the next steps of our journey, which is focusing on strategies for implementation. You're actually the first group that we've reached out to externally to talk about this. So that's great. We're also going to be meeting with our tenants and truck drivers too in the next couple of weeks to gain their insight before we make a final recommendation to our board in June. And before we proceed too, I just wanted to mention, you're going to hear a theme tonight, and it's that it takes a village to raise a zero emission truck. And I say that not to be funny or cute, it's reality. It takes incentive funding, for example, that the SERP steering committee can help advocate for. It takes infrastructure solutions from our partners at San Diego Gas and Electric, and it takes the port coming up with ambitious goals and good policy as well. So it takes a lot of partners to make this happen. And I just want to reinforce that, how integral it is to have us combined on this. Okay, next slide. All right, so you may know that the port adopted its maritime clean air strategy in October last year in 2021. Our strategy contains a variety of goals and objectives to reduce emissions from our maritime related activity in the Portside community. And an important topic throughout the development of the maritime clean air strategy has been trucks. I think it's fair to say that the port, with the adoption of the Maritime Clean Air Strategy, adopted probably the most ambitious goals when it comes to zero emission trucking that exist in the country at a port. Those goals are to reach 40% zero emission truck trips in June 2026 and 100% by the end of the decade, by the end of 2030. And we're developing this heavy duty zero emission truck transition plan to serve as a roadmap to how we're going to achieve those goals. Next slide, please. So this is the SERP information that I'm sure the steering committee is well versed in, but I wanted to showcase this because there's clear alignment with what we're trying to do to support zero emission trucking at our port, and clear alignment with what the SERP is advocating for as well. So on the right side of the screen there, you can see the Mentimeter survey that was conducted, I guess, last year in May, where you prioritize some of the activities that you'd like to see in the SERP. And the second priority there is an electric truck pilot, so going towards zero emission trucks, and charging infrastructure, the infrastructure to support that transition. So these have been clear goals of the SERP. And again, I just want to reinforce, it takes a village to raise a zero emission truck, and how important it is that we're in alignment on these goals. Next slide. Okay, this is our schedule for what we've been doing over the past few months. We started this project in December of 2021, and then we're going to wrap it up in June. And I can tell you from a bureaucrat's perspective, this is fast timing. The first part of our analysis has been doing data collection so that we can understand the trucking profile that exists at our port. This is information that we've never really had before. What are the truck characteristics? How do they operate? What are the average mileages that they travel? The next step was to develop a preliminary pathway to get insight from our board at a meeting that we had with our board in April. So we presented what our preliminary pathway was to them, and we're going to present that to you tonight. And then as we proceed over the next few weeks, really, we're going to wrap this up into a final plan that includes strategies for implementation, costs of this transition, policies, et cetera, to make sure that we can reach these goals. Next slide. Okay, I wanted to talk about the two types of zero emission trucks that we're focused on in our plan. I'm aware that some of you may not be up to speed on the technology, so I thought it'd be good to introduce that to you. And there's really two types of trucks that we're focused on: battery electric trucks, and then on the next slide, we'll see fuel cell electric trucks. Now, both of these trucks have similarities. They're both zero emissions. That means they do not produce any emissions at their tailpipe. They both result in health benefits for the drivers and for the communities that they travel in. Both of these trucks operate on electricity, just in different ways. There are differences between these trucks worth noting, and these differences helped us prioritize the pathway that we'll see on the upcoming slides. But I'll talk through these a little bit. So a battery electric truck obviously runs off of electricity that's stored in its batteries. Battery electric trucks are good for short to medium distance runs or distances that they travel. And this is because the batteries have a certain capacity, so a certain amount of distance that they allow the truck to travel. And in right now in 2022, that's roughly 150 miles. We see the introduction of newer trucks coming into the market now that have about 200 to 250 miles of range. So they're good for those regional distances at best right now, but not for long distance runs yet. There are battery electric trucks that are commercially available today. In fact, about 8 manufacturers have these for commercial retail sale today in our state. Other important things about battery electric trucks, that there are established rates that have been approved by or that have been instituted by San Diego Gas and Electric. And these rates are really good to keep the costs low for charging these vehicles, which is absolutely important to make sure that the costs for operating these trucks are going to be low. Infrastructure it's hard to say it's mature, but there has been about a decade of infrastructure that's been deployed in California when it comes to passenger vehicles, charging stations throughout the state. But when it comes to these heavy duty trucks, there's really not much infrastructure that's been deployed. San Diego Gas and Electric does have some really great programs right now to install this infrastructure. And so that's been moving along for the past couple of years. One of the downsides of battery electric trucks is that they take a long time to charge. At best, you're going to charge up one of these vehicles an hour, maybe 90 minutes. But for better charging rates, you're going to charge them all night long before they operate. Okay, let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about fuel cell electric trucks. Now, fuel cell electric trucks, you may have heard this term before. These are powered by hydrogen. So hydrogen is stored in tanks on the vehicle. It interacts chemically with oxygen to form electricity, and that electricity will propel the vehicle forward. Hydrogen trucks offer the promise of longer range distances. In fact, in our discussions with manufacturers, the trucks that may be coming in the next year or two may be capable of around 500 miles of range. Then towards the end of the decade, we may see these trucks being capable of 800 miles to 1,000 miles, which is very important for trucking, especially trucks that leave our port that travel all the way to Washington or Utah, for example. Now, there are not commercially available heavy duty tractor trailer trucks that you see on the slide available today in the United States. We do expect them to be available perhaps as early as 2023, so next year. But in the next couple of years, we expect hydrogen vehicles to come to the marketplace. There are hydrogen electric buses that are available in the United States right now, as well as in Europe. They do sell trucks that are hydrogen focused. So these trucks are a thing, they are real. It's just that they're not commercially available here yet. Now, these trucks do offer the advantage of faster refueling, which is very important to a truck driver. They can fuel these up just like they would a diesel truck in about 10 to 15 minutes. The fuel price is expensive right now, so the fuel price will need to come down to make them cost competitive. And infrastructure, of course, is very limited. There's a variety of stations that are located in California, hydrogen fuel cell stations that can fuel up passenger cars, but when it comes to heavy duty trucking, we haven't seen those yet. But that's expected to grow as well. All right, so next slide. Okay, so some of that data helps to inform the preliminary zero emission pathway that we're focused on right now to achieve our goals. So just as a reminder, in 2026, our goal is to get to 40% zero emission truck trips, and then by the end of the decade, 100%. For 2026, to get to our near-term goal, which is only 4 years away, we're focused more primarily on battery electric trucks. Okay, and that's simply because there's more commercial models available and the infrastructure is starting to be deployed and we have those nice rates for charging. But to get to our 40% goal, or in fact, just shy of 40%, we need battery electric trucks with the addition of opportunity charging. So what is opportunity charging? Opportunity charging means that a battery electric truck begins its daily journey on a full state of charge. So it had charged up all night long. It starts its daily operations, but at some point during the day, the batteries will expire and they'll need to be recharged. So opportunity charging is that opportunity for those trucks to charge up. Without opportunity charging, we don't see a realistic pathway to get to our 40% goal. So that just reinforces the importance of infrastructure. Getting infrastructure out into the real world to support these vehicles is paramount. And the good thing is that our maritime clean air strategy does have supporting goals to identify locations where we can put infrastructure, both by the port, regionally, and then we're working with a whole host of people on infrastructure elsewhere. As I said, we just get shy of our 40% goal with that strategy. In fact, about 37% of the truck trips could be accomplished with battery electric trucks and opportunity charging. To close that 3% gap, we can do two things. We can focus on early retirement of diesel vehicles and get them into battery electric trucks, hopefully. Or we can, hopefully we'll see advancement of those fuel cell electric trucks in the next year or two, and we could sprinkle in a few of those early adopters of those vehicles, and we can achieve our goal. Now, to get to 2030, our 100% goal, we'll need a combination of both of those, especially the fuel cell electric trucks to go those longer distance but the problem with 2030, this is an aggressive target that's even ahead of the state requirements. is that we would need to have trucks retire earlier than their useful life, meaning many trucks in the year 2030 will not be ready to be replaced yet. They're still young enough, to use that term. People are still paying off their financing on those vehicles, et cetera. So we would have to find unique ways to get people out of those trucks and into zero emission trucks to reach our 2030 goal. All right. Before we go to the next slide, I just want to reinforce. So as we're thinking about strategies, we feel like 2026, we have a little bit more certainty on the types of things that we can do to achieve that goal. As we get to 2030, we're talking about trucks that travel all over the Western United States. To get to that goal, we need to form partnerships. Again, it takes a village to raise these types of vehicles. And there's lots of things out of our control. We'll need to have infrastructure, not only throughout California, not only throughout San Diego, but outside of the state as well. Because our products leave our terminals here on the working waterfront and head out all over the place. So it's going to take much more than the work that even California is doing to reach that goal. So we can provide framework ideas for 2030, but there's a lot of less certainty by that time period. Now, right now, our friends at our consultant group, WSP, are trying to figure out exactly how many trucks need to be turned over to reach our 2026 goal. And there's going to be a range of trucks, depending on if we force expedited turnover or if we look at natural turnover of those vehicles. And the costs, I'll just set this up for you. The costs are going to be very expensive to get to these goals, somewhere between probably $80 million to $350 million in full-on cost just to get to 2026. So I just wanted to mention that and how important it is to get funding to achieve these. Next slide. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of go over some of the challenges that we see, but those challenges need to have solutions. And so we're at the port, we've been identifying some of the strategy concepts that we can try to deploy to overcome these challenges. And just as a reminder, I'm hoping tonight we can have a dialogue with all of you about the types of strategies that you're considering. We have already received a letter from the Environmental Health Coalition regarding strategies, and many of the strategies that they suggest are the same things that we're thinking about. None of these are carved in stone right now, so we'd love to hear from you guys tonight as well. There are significant cost barriers to these vehicles. At best, a battery electric truck costs 3 times the cost of a new diesel truck. And if you buy a used diesel truck, which many of our operators do, it can be 9 to 10 times the cost of that. So getting folks into these trucks is absolutely necessary. And it's going to be hard. We have to rely on federal and state funding to do that. There are incentive programs here in California. I know that the SERP Steering Committee has advocated for funding as well, and Kathy has presented on that before and will again, hopefully tonight, to talk about what kind of funding that we can provide here from the SERP, but you can't do it without it. We need that funding. At the port, we're also thinking about issuing our own competitive grants to truckers and to our tenants. We have some money that we'd like to deploy to get early adopters into these vehicles. We could think about ways to disincentivize the use of diesel trucks as well through our tariff structure or fees. And then lastly, we're thinking about new business models. I've been fortunate to talk to some new and emerging businesses that are trying to think about turnkey solutions. Well, these companies will own chargers, own trucks, and then lease them to truck drivers for a competitive rate. And those are the types of thinking that we're going to need to make this happen. Infrastructure, as you can all imagine, is limited, and we need a lot of it. Again, there's only so much the port can do, but together we need to work together to do this. And so there's federal funding in the infrastructure law at the federal level, and then state funding as well to get these chargers in the ground. And in fact, as I said earlier, San Diego Gas and Electric has some great programs right now to put in charging to facilitate and support zero emission trucking on the heavy duty side. So we're working closely with them. Another thing that we're doing is identifying locations near the port and around the region where potentially we can site infrastructure for public charging of these vehicles. We recognize that we need that opportunity charging And so we're identifying those locations, and we're going to be bringing a concept plan to our port or to our board by the end of this year, identifying locations where that can go. Let's see, truck availability. This is a big issue. Not all trucks are the same. And so there's certain types of trucks that may not have a zero emission model available until later in the decade. So a lot of the manufacturers right now are creating their zero emission models based on just a standard tractor trailer truck, sort of the bread and butter type truck that they do all their sales based on. But some trucks, such as auto carrier trucks, which you'll see down in National City, or trucks that require specialized power to power the back of their unit for certain activities. Some of those trucks are somewhat, I hate to use the term boutique trucks, but they're just not sold in mass amount of numbers. And so the manufacturers aren't creating the zero emission models yet for those vehicles, and may not be doing that till later in the decade. So that could definitely affect our ability to reach our goals. Some of the options for dealing with that into lower emissions would be to analyze the opportunity for near zero emission vehicles. These could be vehicles that reduce emissions 90% or so, but also working with the manufacturers, what we call the OEMs, to expedite zero emission models. And there's only so much that the Port of San Diego can do to press these manufacturers, but collectively, I think that we can make an impact there. And then lastly, awareness is absolutely crucial. I've had the good fortune to sit across the table from a lot of our fleet managers and talk to them about electrification, and they're all interested, but I think it's fair to say that they're uncertain about these vehicles. They've never driven in them before, for the most part. It takes a whole new fueling infrastructure that they're not used to. And so we need to improve our education and outreach to the fleets and the truck drivers. The good thing is we are starting to do that already, and the port is working again with partners to do that. For example, we're working with the Air Pollution Control District, we're working with San Diego Gas and Electric to build a consortium and go to our fleet managers together as a group to educate them about these trucks, talk about the incentives, and try to get them into these vehicles. So we're going to continue to advocate with our regional partners on this. But we also need to educate the community about what our concerns are here. You know, San Diego oftentimes doesn't get all the funding that other locations throughout California do get for this transition. And so I think it's important to build awareness and tell the world about the ambitious goals that we have at the port and our alignment, the alignment between the MCAS as well as the CERB, so that we can get more funding in our region to support this transition. I think we can do it faster than the other regions around the state, just because the scale down here is just not as large as elsewhere. So I'm excited about that future. Why don't we go to the next slide? Thanks. Okay, for our next step, so we're going to develop those strategies for implementation, as I said, and we want to hear from you all tonight about that. I believe we're coming back in May to the next steering committee, so we can provide an update on where we're at before we go to our board in June. And as I said, we have some other outreach events that we're going to be doing. I will be at that Pepper Park workshop next week. So if any members from the community want to come and talk to me about the truck transition plan, I'll be available for that. And as I said, we're going to be talking to our tenants about strategies they can think of to get folks into zero emission vehicles. And most importantly, we're going to talk to the truck drivers themselves next week. So excited to have those conversations and excited to present this to you tonight. Happy to answer all your questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Phil. That was a great presentation. Opening it up to the steering committee and members of the public, feel free to raise your hand on any questions or comments you'd like to give the port. And to get us started, Joy?
Yes. So I hadn't seen these slides before. I haven't been at the port meetings, and I'm really blown away. That was great to hear that, you know, we're going to be able to make the 2026 and 2030 goals that are in the MCAS. You've all been working very hard and thinking very creatively, and I'm really impressed by all the the partnerships you're setting up. This seems like what needs to happen to make sure that there's infrastructure at the local level, but also regionally and even beyond, so that as the trucks become technologically able to go further, they can get charged. So that's all really good to hear. And this is all really in line with the SERP, which, as you of course know, does prioritize trucks. It also prioritizes equity. So I just to mention that, that as there's incentive funding for truckers, it's important that it be fair, and that there aren't burdens put on small truckers, that they have priority for the funding. So I wanted to be sure and mention that. I think that among those strategies you're developing for implementation, that does include strategies for funding, as well as for developing that infrastructure. And so, maybe we'll hear some more detail on those in May. That I'm really looking forward to that. And, of course, I want to, say that the steering committee, I think, is ready to do whatever we can to help get that funding, or get, more of the grant funding, as well as to think more about, what other strategies for increasing funding might be available. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Joy.
Thank you. Roman? I think you're still on mute. Roman, are you still there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. I'm seem to having some connectivity issues. Yeah, thanks, Phil, for this great presentation. Really appreciate the level of detail, as well as the explanation between battery electric and fuel cell, and the benefits to that. I think that's always really helpful to share that, and the benefits and some of the continued challenges with both of them. I didn't get to hear all of Joy's comments because, as I mentioned, I'm having some connectivity issues, but definitely double click on uplifting the equity recommendations that were provided as part of the SERP. And as we develop this implementation strategy, that continues to be one of the guiding principles that we take into account, and ensuring that we're not creating any undue burdens to drivers and to others as well. So wanted to highlight that, but then also just thinking about the strategy itself, and I know Environmental Health Coalition put together a letter recently to help advocate at the state level to have a certain amount of funds dedicated to the port to help with this implementation. And it just makes me think of, how do we leverage that and do more of that type of advocacy moving forward, both at the governor's office to make sure that, they're aware of the goals that have been established here in San Diego, and that, maybe we start looking at that medium to heavy duty funding structures differently, right? Because right now, a lot of that is on a first come, first served basis. Through a competitive process, makes it really difficult, and giving the limited resources. And maybe it's doing some advocacy to start shifting those funds from a first come, first serve to something different, right? Something that is now more on, a certain amount for San Diego, a certain amount for LA, a certain amount for other regions, similar to what happens with some of the contiguous funding that we see for transit. So definitely something for us to think about in that part. But a question for you, Phil, is this is going to require a lot of grant writing, right? Because it's going to. So do you all foresee having or building out a team or hiring someone to help with it? Because those grants come and go. Sometimes they drop and we only have 30 days, maybe 60 days to complete the competitive grant solicitations. So curious how you all are factoring that into this implementation strategy.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. And as you saw, I mean, we do need to focus on federal and state funding to achieve this. Some of the state funding doesn't actually require grant writing, right? Like the HVIP program is a voucher that you can get at the point of sale, which is nice. But to your point, sometimes those are taken up super fast and the big fleets grab those ahead of the smaller folks. We do have a grant writing team at the Port of San Diego, so we're lucky to have that. And this is a priority for us. So if there is grant funding available in, let's say, the infrastructure law that was passed by the Biden administration, we have folks that are ready to apply for those. And on that point, this is why I think it's so critical that we do a truck transition plan, is because we need to have the numbers. We need to know how many trucks need to be converted to meet our 2026 goals. What's the total cost? What's the infrastructure cost? As I said, I threw out an estimated number at 100 million on the low, or 80 million, I think I said, on the low end. That could be much higher. So one of the most important things that we hope to get out of this are those numbers, so that while we go and tell the story to state and feds and legislators, et cetera, that we have some quantitative, things that we can share with them. But I guess to answer your question directly, we have a grant writing team that is capable of applying for these.
And Phil, maybe if you don't mind, I'll just jump in real quick. The other thing that I think is just important to remind folks is, the port, we don't own any of these trucks. So while we do have a grant writing team, what we're really going to need to do is we're really going to need to establish partnerships with the trucking companies and or the individual owner operator truckers to try to get, again, the trucking community into these trucks, understanding that, we don't own them. So we'll have to, again, figure out some creative ways to again, advance some of the ideas identified in the truck transition plan.
Excellent point, Larry. You're right. I should have mentioned that. Yeah, it's a great point.
Great. Thank you for that. Moving along, Jack.
Thanks, Chewy. Hey, Phil, that was a fantastic presentation. Congratulations to you and Larry and your team. You have, I think, presented the best I have seen analysis of the strengths of all these different type of vehicle engine sources, the obstacles to having a reliable or a sufficient supply of those vehicles to really reach our goals, the limitations that are out there with regard to these vehicles, and the obstacles that stand in the way to us achieving these goals. It's the most well-rounded presentation I've seen on this topic anywhere in the last 5 years. So I know you guys have been working like crazy on this for months now for the district, and I think you've got a model here that helps people understand. It's one thing to set a goal without understanding all the limitations and challenges it's going to take to get there. And now you've come forward with a good program and a good, I think, demonstration of what it's going to take to get there and what we've got to do whether it's grant funding or more education or whatever the case may be. It's just, I really appreciate the way you've developed this and sharing it with us tonight.
Oh, thanks, Jack. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Then moving along, Akshita.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I do want to echo that. Thank you so much, Bill and Larry and the entire team. I think the clarity of this presentation was incredibly helpful. I think primarily because you are getting into these details that are so kind of important to get us to any of the goals that we're trying to achieve. I wanted to just probe a little more and ask for some clarification on how the port, as you're working with these trucking companies and truck manufacturers and independent truckers, how are you observing them? I mean, how do you see them kind of framing ZEV infrastructure in terms of their cradle to cradle considerations? So how are trucking companies thinking about, where and how lithium is mined? At which point are these, are there checks and balances to ensure that there is kind of, the lithium is coming from responsible means? And is this something that we can, again, recommend as part of the process? I know during some of the MCAS subcommittee meetings, the kind of cradle to cradle had come up at one point, but I was just more interested in how you see these discussions happening in the field as of now, since you are speaking with manufacturers and independent truckers and so on.
Yeah, I can answer that question as best I can, which means I haven't had many conversations about it, frankly, on where they're sourcing their material from. I know it's becoming more prominent of an issue where the metals are coming from to put into these batteries as well as into renewable energy infrastructure. So I haven't had those discussions, frankly, with the manufacturers of these vehicles. I would venture to say I don't know if the truck drivers know too much about that as well. It is important to consider, obviously, and as we're trying to get away from one dirty technology from diesel, are we going to force in a new environmental problem on these? And of course, we don't want to do that. But I think it's a good topic for the steering committee to discuss, and when you're advocating for things to be more considerate of those.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akshita. And then I just wanted to point you all to Roman's comment about embedding equity essentially into how the grant team can support smaller independent contractors. Is there any other questions before we move on to the next presentation?
If I can just reply to Ramon's question. Yeah, as I said, we're doing our best right now to form sort of a coalition so that we can communicate with truck drivers at our port. Again, bringing in the utility as well as APCD with their specific funding, I think has been really helpful for people to learn about. I call it sort of a concierge or white glove service at this point. I think that's what's needed to get these folks into these vehicles. At the Port of San Diego, frankly, we don't have large trucking fleets that visit us. And I don't know what the definition of large is, but these aren't national trucking firms that come through our port for the most part. And so a lot of these trucking companies are relatively small. So I think trying to work with each one of them individually is what we're focused on. I'll say one more thing too. Sorry to take up time, but we've done some analysis on the number of trucks which visit our terminals, and what we've determined is that although there may be a few thousand, let's say, trucks that visit, individual trucks which visit our 10th Avenue Marine Terminal, there's actually a tight core group of about 40 to 250 trucks that make the most trips at our port, which means there's fewer and fewer companies for us to focus our attention on to get to these near-term goals and to really make a difference. So we're trying to do more outreach with all of them. And as I said, we'll be hosting that meeting next week with the truckers and hope to learn a lot more from them. But thanks, Roman.
Thank you for that, Phil. And Roman, do you still have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna add one more thing. Thanks, Phil, for that answer, and apologies for taking up a lot of space here. In just thinking about the coordination that's happening with SDG&E, and this is probably more for a question for the folks from SDG&E, but I remember there was a request to for SDG&E to start mapping some of those needs, right? Those charging needs. I'm curious if that is concurrently happening as you all are having conversations, as you all are doing this data gathering. So yeah, I think maybe it's not an answer, a question you can answer, Phil, but maybe more for SDG&E.
Hi, this is Dinah Willier with SDG&E. Hi, good evening. And great presentation, Phil, for mapping out the whole strategy that the port has. In terms of the charging needs for the region, we basically look at requests for service on the SDG&E system. And from there, we go forward with evaluating the system. We do have some planning where we are looking at, say, like the port areas and planned projects in those areas, and look at the entire infrastructure in that area to support the capacity needed for those facilities. as well as we are providing some type of resiliency with battery storage projects, et cetera, throughout the county. So that I can't tell you that we've identified specific areas per se specifically, but as a whole, we are looking at the grid to make sure that we have the resiliency and reliability required for the onslaught of battery electric charging, as well as for building electric, building transition to fully electric buildings. Does that address your question?
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that. I think it's more of the coordination, right? So like with all this data coming in from the analysis that the Air District is doing, how we can align the deployment of charging infrastructure efforts that you all are taking. Because I mean, I think for now it seems it's more about like who's raising their hand and who's wanting to participate because of the need that they have. But if we could start aligning both, so that if we're able to like, one, see where their needs are and have a map of what that looks like, see where SDG&E is currently deploying some of that and where it's not, right? And then how can then how can there be some collaboration to fill that gap, right, where some of that charging is needed? So yeah, I think maybe it's just more on that coordination effort.
And Ramon, maybe I'll just jump here quickly. I don't think it does. I think Dinah was talking a little bit about kind of the resiliency component, but I can tell you, maybe Phil can go in a little bit more detail. We are, meeting with Caltrans and SANDAG and several other public agencies to kind of look at the zero emission infrastructure regionally. So I think we meet with them. I don't know if it's every week or every 2 weeks, Phil, but so again, I don't know if you want to go into maybe that coordination that we're doing with both SANDAG and Caltrans, but I'm safe to say that, based upon, again, the goods movement in general, I know we're working with some of our other public agency partners on that.
Yeah, I think you've covered it, Larry. I mean, we're trying to meet with everybody and anybody who's focused on deploying the charging infrastructure for these. But I think to Ramon's point, not just focus on the people who are raising their hands and saying, hey, I'm ready, but our truck transition plan hopefully will identify more and more of these trucking fleets, and so that we can have better discussions with them about how to get them into these vehicles and how the utility and the rest of us can support their transition.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. Now that we're at 7:40, I do want to give time for Kathy's presentation, but if you can give any links or any email for folks to contact you for more questions, feel free to add in the chat. Great. Now, Kathy, I will be handing it over to you now to go over incentives.
Thanks. I want to start off with saying, Phil, wow. Amazing presentation. Really exciting to see all the things that the port is planning, and I learned some lessons on clear and concise presentations. Mine is not that good, but I'm just really impressed with all of that work. I wanted to quickly, before I jump into this, to encourage folks we're participating with the port and several other agencies, SANDAG and those and the county, on our A to Z collaborative, which really is looking at that overall kind of universe of what charging infrastructure looks like, both for passenger vehicles and for heavy duty equipment. So we're trying to answer those questions that you're bringing up, Ramon, about where is charging going to be needed and what's it going to look like and how are we going to pay for it. So thank you for that. My presentation today is going to be a little bit different than that. We're going to talk about our update on our incentive project. So next slide, please. As you recall, hopefully we have kind of two paths for our incentive projects. We have our regular Moyer and AB 617 projects. Those are an application process. We follow the statewide guidelines. And then we have SERP, those community identified projects where, like Phil was talking about today, that port pilot project, or the Portside pilot project for electric trucks, for example. Today, And I just want to remind you guys that we do have $4 million set aside for those zero emission truck projects. We're waiting on the CARB to do a final check off on our plan for awarding those funds out, for a process to award those funds out for trucks that support the port. And so we'll be coming back to you when we hear from those. Today, though, we're going to talk about the regular Moyer projects. Next slide, please. Hopefully you guys remember we did a project solicitation. We asked people to tell us, we have this money available, not just through our Moyer program and AB 617, but Farmer and Goods Movement program. Give us your applications. So we had that process open from November to January. We received 242 applications for various pieces of equipment for $57 million in requested funding. So it's taken us a little while to get through all of those. We're still working on it. As a reminder, we have over $18 million in AB 617 funding available this year to spend on our incentive programs. Tonight, we have some preliminary results of those applications. Next slide, please. I want to stress that these results are very preliminary. We've done application evaluation. Our next step in the process is our staff is going out and looking at all the pieces of equipment and making sure that that information is correct and we understand the eligibility. But at this time, with the information that we have a universe of projects that we think we can fund with our AB 617 funding. And those are listed on this slide. They range everywhere from zero emission marine, like battery electric tugboats, to electric school buses. For infrastructure, like we were just talking about, that this kind of zero emission equipment requires zero emission infrastructure to plug in and charge up. We have an application for zero emission school landscape equipment, which I have a question for you guys later. And we also have some combustion based projects. So projects that are doing our lower emission diesel or natural gas projects to achieve emission reductions. And those, we have some marine projects, we have some agricultural equipment, we have one school bus and a natural gas fueling station. So next, this slide, it includes we're going to talk a little bit about these numbers, but it includes the amount that we think those projects are eligible for. Again, these are very preliminary numbers. Please don't take these to the bank yet. And our preliminary evaluation of the emission reductions from all of those different kinds of projects. So next slide, please. We just broke it down a little bit for you all to see. We had 18 applications for that combustion equipment, fossil fuel equipment, and we had 9 applications for zero emission equipment and infrastructure. When we looked at what we think things are eligible for, it looks like we have about $3.5 million worth of eligible projects for the combustion equipment and about $9.5 million of funding for projects that are zero emission that are eligible for funding. Next slide, please. We did do a quick, like I said, evaluation of the emission reductions. Again, can't stress this enough, preliminary. We looked at the zero emission equipment providing about 26 tons of emission reductions, the combustion equipment providing about 200 tons of emission reductions. These do not include emission reductions from the infrastructure projects. We know those will have emission reductions. We need that that infrastructure to be able to achieve the emission reductions from the mobile equipment. But for right now, we just looked at the mobile equipment on those emission reductions. I know I'm going really fast, but we're almost done and then we can go back and take questions. Next slide, please. I wanted to give you guys a sense of where the projects are. As you recall, this AB 617 funding is to help projects in the state designated disadvantaged communities. And so for San Diego, that's not only Portside, but our communities along the border, San Isidro, and also a section of El Cajon where those census tracts qualify for AB 617 inclusion. You can see on this map, the red dots are where those equipments, these are very general. We didn't do specific addresses, but in general, these are where the projects land. You can see there are some at the border. There are some, and certainly some in Portside, and a couple of projects up in that El Cajon area. Next slide, please. I have a couple questions for you guys tonight. I know we whipped through that really quickly, so I'm happy to answer your questions. I'm hoping you can think about, I have one, it's not a dilemma, but a question for you. We have a project that qualifies for new landscape equipment, zero emission landscape equipment at schools. And that is one of the new categories in our AB 617 program that the state is allowing. We had a school district apply for that funding, which is wonderful. We're so appreciative that people are finding these programs and interested in doing it. We have, that school district has one school that is within the state designated communities, and it has 4 other schools that they also applied for that are in the same district, but are not specifically in the disadvantaged communities. We think it's a good idea and a worthwhile small investment in those schools to allow all of the projects for those school landscaping equipment to be eligible, whether they're in the disadvantaged community or not. But we wanted to get your feedback on that tonight. And we're also hoping to get your feedback on the project mix and the funding levels. Are there things that are you okay with us moving forward with these kinds of projects and at these kinds of funding levels? So I'll stop right there and try and answer people's questions and hopefully hear some feedback from you all.
Thank you, Kathy. Now I want to open it up to folks to see if they have any answers to these questions, particularly the first one. Feel free to add it into the chat if that's easier, your thoughts, but definitely would love to hear from folks. Go ahead, Roman.
Thanks, Kathy, for raising this issue. Just a quick question: if this were to proceed, will the entire amount account for a DAC investment, or will it be partial?
That's a good question. I anticipate it would be partial. I don't think we wouldn't get credit for investments in that DAC community if those schools are outside it. There is some flexibility in the funding. We are allowed to fund projects that are outside the designated communities, but we also want to make sure that you all are aware if that's happening and make sure you're okay with it.
Okay. And then regarding those other schools, I mean, you say they're outside of the DAC definition, but by any chance, do you know if it's within the AB 1550 defined community?
Yeah,
they are.
I think 3 of the 4, there's 4 schools that are outside the DAC definition communities, but at least 3 of the 4 are in low income communities, that 1550 definition.
Okay, that's helpful. I think that's really helpful to know. I know it falls outside of kind of the intent here, but as I think about how we would want to see these investments, right? 1 out of the 4, but it seems 3 out of the 4 would be within a disadvantaged and or low income community. So I think from my perspective, I would feel comfortable with proceeding.
Great, thanks.
Joy?
Yeah, those are very helpful clarifications. Thank you, Roman and Kathy. And I think with that understanding, I would also feel comfortable with funding all of those schools.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any feedback on that one?
None. Is anyone opposed? Maybe that's easy.
That might be easier. If any, well, I wouldn't say opposed, but if people have concerns or need more information, happy to talk about that. No one's opposed to kids, but people sometimes need more information, and we have to make, you know, hard decisions sometimes. So
Definitely. Great.
yeah.
I'm wondering if folks have any comments for the second question around the project mix. And Anna, I think it'll be easier maybe to show that table.
Yeah, if you want to go back to that slide with the table, I think that's helpful.
How do folks feel about these projects, project types? And any questions? Joy?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to note, you know, that in addition to these emission reductions in the listed pollutants, the zero emission ones are also reducing greenhouse gases. And it's important to keep that in mind. So they don't come out as well on the, you know, cost effectiveness for these pollutants, but it's still important to be going here. So I mean, I think it's still important to prioritize the zero emission ones, you know, to the greatest extent that can be done.
Agreed. Yeah, and to jump on that, Joy, all of the zero emission projects that we receive that are eligible, we are planning to fund. We know that that's a priority for the community, and those are at the top of our list.
Okay, well, that's good news. Thank you.
Oh, looks like Phil had a question.
Sure, thanks. I hope I'm allowed to contribute.
No, no,
No, I'm not.
of
Darn it.
of course, please.
I just made my pitch for 80 to 350 million. So, but you know, I noticed on this table, I think I saw on a slide before that there was 18 million, and this slide summarizes up to about 13 million, leaving potentially 5 million. Is that unencumbered or unallocated at this point? Is there opportunity for more funding to support zero emission trucks?
There is. That's an excellent question, Phil. That yes, we've set aside $4 million already. This 13, sorry for the math, this 13 million is coming out of the 18 million that's available, not counting that. So yes, there's definitely opportunity for us to fund additional zero emission trucks. And if there's the desire to do that, and we would very much like to do that. Are there any other questions? If not, maybe Chewy, we could go to the very last slide. Just give you a sneak peek of where we're going next. So as I mentioned before, our staff is going out and doing inspections on all of that equipment to make sure that they're eligible and finalize those grant amounts. And then given the feedback from today's meeting, we would look to enter into contracts with those approved applicants as soon as we can. We really want to get these projects on the ground. We know it takes a long time, particularly for the zero emission ones to get going. So we want to move as quickly as we can. So that's what's going to happen next. We will, of course, keep you all apprised of how it's going and what we're doing, and look forward to talking with you not only about these projects, but about that, hopefully that zero emission truck pilot that will be coming soon. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your time, and again, encourage you to reach out to me if you have questions or comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Oh, thank you.
Now we're towards the end of our meeting, but quickly just want to check in and see if anyone has any public comment. or suggestions for future agenda meetings before we close out? Liliana?
I'm almost embarrassed. I know we're running over, and so I just want to announce really quick that CARB will have an informational board item on May 19th, and this is to give an update on the AB 617 state-wide strategy, which is also known as our blueprint. We're required to update the blueprint every 5 years. In this, so we'll be giving an update on some of the our timeline for updating the blueprint for the blueprint revision. And we'll also have a panel of consultation group members to discuss the people's blueprint and their thoughts on how we could improve our program. Let me just drop some links in the chat that'll give more information on how you can join and participate in the board meeting. Again, May 19th, starting at 4 p.m. And that is it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Liliana. And if you can send me that info over email, I can also share it to the listserv.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Great. So before we close out, just wanted to see if Domingo had anything else to add.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Just very quickly for the members of the steering committee, we are looking at developing a letter of support for AB 2141, which is a state bill that is looking at expanding funding for the Community Air Protection Program, or the AB 617 program, statewide. So please be on the lookout. We'll probably be reaching out via email, since for timing purposes, we might not be able to wait until our next meeting. So I just wanted to put that out there. Again, this bill is to support additional funding for this program. So that's a good thing. And that's it for me. Thank you, everybody, and thanks to all of our presenters.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And with that, we'll close it off, and we'll see you all on May 24th.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good meeting.
Good night, everybody. Buenas
Thanks,
noches.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Buenas noches.